Hey guys, today I'm going to be showing you a few Viper wall placements. Viper's wall is the only tool in the game that can consistently block lines of sight multiple times in a round. All the other agents that can block line of sight will eventually run out of their smokes during the round, whereas Viper, as long as you have fuel, you can use the wall. This makes Viper an excellent counter to the operator meta, as long as you can place the walls well. By using her wall early in the round, you can help your team gain map control, and you can save your teammates other smokes to help when you're trying to push into a site. Especially with the new Viper buff coming in patch 1.04, I can see her becoming a much more commonly played agent. This first wall blocks line of sight from both A-Link and mid-Pisa into the mid-courtyard, making it much easier for the offensive team to take mid-control without having to worry about being held by an operator from mid-cubby. Be careful of quick defensive pushes up to the wall in mid-courtyard at the start of the round. Otherwise, you'll have a massive advantage over any defensive players who decide it's a good idea to push through the wall. Next is actually a smoke lineup, as it's impossible to get safely to an angle to wall off a site. Also, due to the rafters, in most positions a defensive player can see over the wall from rafters. The smoke lands on the edge of rafters, forcing any defensive players trying to hold that angle to either retreat or hold the angle from out in the open in the middle of rafters. The next wall makes an attacking push into B site from B main much simpler. Try not to use site-specific walls instantly at the start of the round, as it telegraphs your team's play to the defensive team. This wall blocks line of sight from mid-market and the defender spawn, although you'll still need to be careful of anyone holding behind the shed or the back of B site. You can place the wall to block the line of sight from shed too, but I don't think this is as good, as it allows the defending team to safely rotate around the back of shed into the B site from their spawn. Whereas if you leave a gap, you can watch the angle cutting off that rotation. The first defensive wall I'm going to show is pretty similar to the first wall I showed, but this time it helps the defensive team get mid control. Although, in its placement, I keep the angle from mid cubby to mid link open, as it's strong to hold that angle with an operator. By cutting the middle of the map in half, you isolate the part of the team pushing from B lobby into mid, making it much riskier for the attacking team to try and assert control in mid. Finally on Ascent, this wall from B site is the exact opposite to the first wall. It blocks line of sight from both areas where attackers can push into mid from. I suggest using this wall if your team doesn't have a player confident in holding mid from A-Link, or your team would just rather that you could take control of mid-courtyard without having to engage in a gunfight. This wall has the advantage over the first that you can push much further up the catwalk without having to worry about an attacking player holding the angle from B lobby. Next up is Bind. These walls are mainly focused on site executes, as you don't really need to block a large line of sight early in the round. First is the wall for A site from showers. Make sure you aim the wall towards the boxes in the middle of sight, as this will block the line of sight from A heaven into A short, making your team's push into A site much easier. Using this wall in tandem with a sage walling off this site from A short will allow you to plant the spike before the defending team knows what's hit them. Just be careful of a defending player holding lamps. Like on Ascent, I thought I'd show a smoke lineup. I'm going to do this for every map, so on Bind we're again targeting the boxes in sight to block line of sight from A heaven into A short. You can use this lineup early in the round and activate it as needed. This smoke also blocks off line of sight from lamps into showers if your team's trying to push that way too. From B site you can block the defender's line of sight from elbow, back B site and their spawn by walling off from B long. If you activate this as your team pushes in from hooker, the only angle they need to be wary of is B cubby, although to get into the corner by the teleporter you should already have cleared that area. The only problem with this wall is that it goes over the tunnel in the middle of sight, leaving a gap underneath it which a defending player can sneak through. On defense, this wall for A site will stall any attacking pushes into the site by blocking both the entrances from showers and A short. Try and place the wall as close to the teleporter as possible, as you don't want to help the attacking team by blocking the line of sight to let them quickly rotate into teleporter, using the wall as cover. I especially like this placement as it will damage anyone hiding in the corner by teleporter, and it will cause any attacking player to be disorientated as they decide to push through the wall into sight. The next wall again blocks line of sight from A short, but more importantly blocks off any attacking players pushing into B short at the start of the round. It makes it much easier for an aggressive defensive push from hooker, which should catch the attacking team off guard as it's a pretty unexpected play. Just be careful of any attackers who have pushed into the fountain area. Finally for Bind, a wall blocking off line of sight from hooker and garden into B site. You can place this wall from A site too, depending on where you plan on playing that round. Try not to activate the wall too early, as it will allow the attacking team to more easily take hooker and garden, but if they've already taken those areas, use it to slow an attacking push into sight. Next up is Haven. The first wall is from sewers into the A site. Again, like Bind, make sure the wall goes over the boxes in the middle of site to block line of sight from window as well as lower down in the site. You can place this wall more to the left where it lands in the window and blocks line of sight from the back of A, but I prefer this one generally as someone could be playing behind the boxes in the middle of site and the second wall is ineffective against anyone in that position. If you don't have a wall left, I've also got a smoke lineup for this site. It blocks windows line of sight to sewers as well as A long. Throw the smoke at the gap between the wires for it to land perfectly on the boxes in the middle of site. If used at the right time, this is as effective as any brimstone or omen smoke onto the window. This wall helps the attacking team gain mid control early in the round. It's especially effective if the defending team keep on trying to smoke off mid to gain early control. They've now used their smokes for the round, whereas your team will still have all theirs left for potential site executes. The major thing to look out for is a defensive player using the smoke as cover to push into the cubby outside B site. Later in the round, you could use this wall to watch your team's back if you've planted the spike on B site and the defensive team might have flanked through garage or mid window. This wall for C site makes it much harder for the defensive team to retake C site after the spike is planted. It blocks both entrances to site from garage and A-link, stalling the defenders for time or making it much harder for them to win a gunfight after pushing through the wall. Place it as close to the site as possible so the defenders have no cover if they decide to push through it. This wall can be used early in the round to gain mid control for the defending team. It blocks off both attacking entrances into mid, allowing your team to safely push from B site and garage to take control. Later in the round, it can be used to block line of sight of an attacker defending the spike from the window. Early in the round, be careful of players who use it as cover to sneak into the corner just inside of mid. This wall is very similar to the last, but it blocks off sight lines slightly close to the defender's side of the map. The defending team can still use it to push into mid from B site, but it isn't as effective to push out of garage. This wall also blocks the entrance of C site from C long. Try not to use this wall to give an attacking player cover as they push down C long, but if they've already pushed up C long, it can be used to make their entry into site much harder. I try and use it after the attacking players have already smoked C site, as you've then baited and countered their utility. Finally, we're on to split. There have been a few amazing lineups on attack which have been about since the beta, although they're much easier to do now the wall passes through surfaces. That being said, on defense, split is a worse map for using the wall. The first wall blocks line of sight from both ramp and A heaven into A main and A site respectively. This is a great substitute for smokes which can then be used on screens or to stall retakes. The wall can be used after the spike is planted to make a retake much harder from heaven. In a well coordinated team, a rush strategy in combination with this wall can be very effective. As A heaven is an essential line of sight to block, my smoke lineup for this map does just that. If you're rotating to A site later in the round, stop off to throw this smoke to make the site push much easier. This completely blocks line of sight from A heaven and is pretty easy to throw, especially if you use the map to ping the area you want it to land, and use that to line it up. This wall for mid gives the attacking team control early in the round and blocks a commonly held operator line of sight from vents into mid. This wall saves your team tons of utility and can be used multiple times throughout the round, especially if your team needs to rotate between sites through sewers. The only downside is that it allows for the defending team to use it as cover to rotate through top of mid. This wall is similar to the A site wall, but this time for B. It blocks line of sight from heaven and can also be used to hold the defender spawn after the spike is planted. As I've said before, try not to use these walls until your team is ready to push the site, as it tells the defensive team where you are likely to be attacking, so if you use it 20 seconds before you need it, don't be surprised if the rest of the defending team has rotated to counter your push, although maybe you could use that as a tactic to bait out a defensive rotation. The final worthwhile wall blocks off the top part of mid and entrance to B site from B lobby. This wall shouldn't be used early in the round as it will just let the attacking team take mid control easily. Instead, it should be used to safely let your team rotate through mid later in the round in case an attacking player is holding that angle, and your team needs to rush between the two sites. The part of the wall in B site can help slow a push from B main by blocking the line of sight, but if the attacking team uses Sage Wall, you have to be in a pretty dangerous position to counter their push. Otherwise, on defense, there aren't that many good Viper walls on this map, which is a shame considering how good she is on attack. If you enjoyed this video, please check out my Cypher or Jet lineups, they're on screen now. Thanks for watching!